There's a certain kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound. It comes from being unseen, unfelt, unacknowledged. You know the feeling. You're surrounded by people, at work, at a family gathering, in a classroom, at a party. Laughter echoes, conversations rise and fall. Eyes meet, gestures are exchanged, and yet, it all flows around you like water around a rock. You smile, nod, maybe even speak. But inside, you're not there. Not really. You feel like a ghost. Alive and yet invisible. That feeling of deep, existential loneliness amidst a sea of people isn't rare. In fact, it's becoming the norm. But no one talks about it. Because the modern world has trained us to equate social presence with connection and silence with brokenness. You begin to question yourself. Is it me? Why do crowds exhaust me? Why do parties feel like performances? Why do I crave silence, only to feel haunted by it when it comes? What's wrong with me? But what if the real question isn't about your flaws, but about the system you're trapped in? What if your discomfort isn't a malfunction, but a sign of clarity? A flicker of awareness in a world built to numb you? We were taught that being social was the goal. That connection meant more people, more interaction, more noise. But what if the human soul was never built for this much friction? This much exposure? What if you're not antisocial, but allergic to the artificial? This is not a story about shyness or introversion. It's not about social anxiety. It's about something deeper. Something woven into the fabric of how we live now. Something ancient that has been buried beneath layers of noise, distraction, and expectation. This is about the silent scream that rises when the body is present, but the spirit is unheard. When the eyes look, but don't see you. When the handshake feels cold. When the laugh track plays, but the joke is empty. When the crowd is so loud, it drowns out your own inner voice. It's a scream that starts as a whisper, "This isn't real. This isn't home." We don't feel alone because we're broken. We feel alone because something is wrong with the way society has taught us to connect. Something unnatural. Something forced. We weren't designed to know hundreds of names but share none of our truth. We weren't built to live in cities of millions and die in emotional solitude. We weren't wired to perform intimacy for an algorithm while starving for actual presence. So if you felt the weight of this phantom ache, this invisible fatigue, you're not malfunctioning. You're awakening. This is the beginning of a descent. A peeling back of the masks, the noise, the psychological scripts we are forced to play. Beneath all of it lies a truth that's been whispered for centuries by the philosophers, the mystics, the outcasts. A truth that explains why the most crowded places often feel the most hollow. Why the loudest voices leave the least impact. Why you can feel more seen by a stranger's silence than a friend's performance. The world doesn't want you to notice this. Because noticing means breaking the spell. It means asking dangerous questions. Who taught me to fear solitude? Why do I need to smile to be accepted? Who benefits when I confuse attention for love? In the chapters to come, we're going to explore these questions. Not with easy answers, but with a mirror. A lens. A torch that will take us through the shadows of psychology, history, and the human soul. We'll journey through the ancient design of our minds, the manipulation of our connections, the hidden costs of being social, and the path back to something real. Something true. Something silent, but alive. Because in the end, maybe you don't need more people around you. Maybe you just need fewer masks. And maybe the silence you fear is the place your real voice has been waiting. Let's begin. For most of human history, loneliness was a death sentence. Imagine waking up 50,000 years ago, alone in the wild. No fire, no tribe, no one watching your back. You wouldn't last long. A predator would catch your scent. Hunger would gnaw at your body. Or worse, other humans, those who still had the safety of numbers, would see you as prey. Back then, being part of a group wasn't just a social bonus. It was survival. The tribe was your shelter, your food supply, your defense mechanism. Belonging wasn't optional. It was instinctual. But here's the part we forget: those tribes weren't massive. They weren't endless scrolls of faces. They were small, tightly woven. You knew every person. You didn't just recognize their name, you recognized their scent, their silence, their footsteps in the dirt. Human brains evolved in a world where we were meant to deeply bond with maybe 50 to 100 people. And now? Now we sit in open offices with hundreds of strangers. We walk through cities packed with thousands of unfamiliar faces. We scroll through social media feeds filled with people we don't know, pretending that hearts and likes are a form of connection. But our biology hasn't kept pace. Enter Dunbar's number. Robin Dunbar, a British anthropologist, proposed a limit around 150 meaningful relationships. Beyond that, our brains struggle to keep track. Not just names, but context. Emotions. Stories. What makes someone them? When you exceed that limit, something breaks. Relationships become shallow. Faces blur. Conversations turn performative. You stop feeling people and start simply registering them. And here's the catch: your nervous system still reacts to each interaction like it's a full, intimate exchange. Because it was designed that way. Every handshake, every forced smile, every micro-interaction costs you energy. Not in isolation, but in accumulation. Over time, the crowd doesn't just exhaust you. It erodes you. We weren't meant to live like this. Think about the average day. How many people do you interact with, briefly, digitally, or passively? Co-workers, passengers, advertisers, followers, acquaintances, customer service agents, email chains. It's endless. But how many of those people know who you are when you're silent? When you're not performing? There's a kind of starvation that doesn't come from a lack of food, but from an abundance of simulation. Our ancestors shared meals, stories, fears. They sat in circles, not rows. They looked each other in the eye, not through screens. And when danger came, they stood together. Not as a crowd, but as a family. Now, when danger comes, mental illness, financial ruin, grief, we're told to reach out. To talk to someone. But who? And how? When everyone's too busy being fine. To someone. But who? And how? When everyone's too busy being fine. The crowd, as we know it, is a recent invention. And yet, we've been convinced it's the default. That we must always be on, always be social, always be accessible. We measure popularity in numbers. But connection? That's measured in depth. And depth doesn't scale. This disconnect is why so many people feel alone in cities. Why parties can feel hollow. Why family dinners can feel like emotional deserts. It's not just you. It's not just your personality. It's the world asking you to override something ancient. Something sacred. Your biology wasn't built for this level of exposure. Your mind wasn't wired to juggle hundreds of pseudo-friendships. Your soul wasn't meant to echo in an empty room of followers. And the consequence? Chronic anxiety. Social fatigue. Decision paralysis. Depression that doesn't come from sadness, but from overstimulation. A kind of mental tinnitus, the noise never stops, and yet, you can't hear anything meaningful. Some people adapt. They become performers. They wear masks. They trade authenticity for applause. But even they, at night, feel the cost. A life of constant exposure leaves you emotionally bankrupt. It's not sustainable. It's not real. Others shut down entirely. Withdraw. Disconnect. Not because they don't want connection, but because the available version of it feels poisonous. The group has become a theater. And some of us are simply too tired to keep acting. So we sit on the edge of the crowd. Not quite in. Not quite out. Watching. Waiting. Hoping. But maybe the first step isn't forcing yourself to rejoin the herd. Maybe it's recognizing the herd for what it is, a survival mechanism that no longer serves the soul. Maybe it's realizing that what you called isolation is actually the body's plea for something real. Something intimate. Something quiet. You don't feel overwhelmed by people because you're broken. You feel overwhelmed because you've outgrown the simulation. And the truth is, in a world that constantly demands your presence, the most radical act of healing might be choosing to disappear just long enough to hear yourself again. You walk into a room, and everyone's laughing. You don't understand the joke, but you laugh anyway. Not because you found it funny, but because everyone else did. A reflex. A signal. A mask. Later, you nod through a conversation at work. Someone's talking, but your mind is elsewhere. You still nod. Smile. Say yeah, totally. You don't agree. You don't even care. But the script demands your performance. These moments seem small. Harmless. Just social etiquette. But what if they were evidence of something far more disturbing? What if, piece by piece, gesture by gesture, your mind is being rewritten, not by force, but by repetition? There's a part of your brain responsible for this. A neural system designed not for thought, but for reflection. Mirror neurons. Discovered in the early 1990s, mirror neurons fire not just when you perform an action, but when you see someone else perform it. If you watch someone cry, your brain lights up as if you were crying. If you watch someone get hurt, your body tenses. If someone laughs, smiles, recoils in fear, your brain responds in kind. This was evolution's genius. Mirror neurons allowed us to connect, to empathize, to learn without words. They helped tribes build bonds, raise children, synchronize behavior. They were the architecture of shared feeling. But in a hyper-connected world, their gift has become a trap. Because now, you're not surrounded by 10 people in a firelit circle. You're surrounded by thousands. Faces on screens. Opinions in headlines. Reactions, arguments, outrage, flashing by at breakneck speed. And your mirror neurons? They're firing. Constantly. You scroll past someone crying in a viral video. Your chest tightens. You watch a TikTok of someone dancing. You smile. A celebrity gets attacked online. You feel defensive. A stranger shouts about a political cause. You feel anxious, guilty, angry. But none of it is yours. You didn't choose these emotions. You didn't seek them out. They entered your body through the back door, reflected, repeated, absorbed. And slowly, the line begins to blur. Where do you end, and the simulation begin? This is the death of authenticity, not through censorship or dictatorship, but through endless mimicry. Because the more you mirror others, the less space you have to hear yourself. You wake up feeling anxious. But is it your anxiety? Or did you absorb it from someone else's meltdown the night before? You feel excitement. But is it yours? Or did you watch 10 people on your feed celebrating the same goal? You post a photo. But the pose, the filter, the caption, how much of it is you, and how much of it is imitation? You see, the human mind doesn't just mirror emotions. It mirrors identity. We think we're making choices. But often, we're following scripts. The tone you use on Zoom? Borrowed. The way you talk to your boss? Scripted. The clothes you wear? Marketed. The jokes you tell? Algorithmically reinforced. And so, we become reflections of reflections. A society of mirrors pointed at each other, endlessly bouncing back fragments of borrowed behavior. Until one day, someone steps out of line. They say something honest, something raw, something unfiltered, and the room goes silent. Not because they're wrong, but because they've broken the spell. Those who refuse to mirror are seen as alien, cold, awkward, weird. They make others uncomfortable, not because they're threatening, but because they force a choice, continue the performance, or confront the truth. And most people? They go back to the script. Because it's safer to be accepted than authentic. But here's the cost. Every time you fake a laugh, you numb your real joy. Every time you agree out of obligation, you abandon your voice. Every time you act instead of feel, you drift further from yourself. Eventually, you don't know who you are, only who you've become in other people's presence. Social environments become theaters. Not places of connection, but stages of compliance. The workplace becomes a sitcom set. Friend groups become rehearsed improved troops. Online spaces become talent shows of curated pain, performative compassion, manufactured rage. And somewhere in all this noise, your inner voice whispers. But it gets drowned out. Because authenticity doesn't trend. Vulnerability doesn't scale. Presence doesn't monetize. So you conform. You nod. You smile. You scroll. But it never feels real. Because it isn't. You're not alone because you're strange. You're alone because you haven't given up on being real. You still notice when things feel fake. You still crave conversations that don't need emojis. You still hope for a silence that feels safe, not awkward. You still long for a version of yourself untouched by applause. That longing? That ache? It's proof you're still alive. Because the world doesn't reward authenticity. It fears it. An authentic person can't be sold to as easily. They don't need as much. They don't follow trends. They don't panic just because others do. They are dangerous, not because they're violent, but because they're awake. They remind others of what they've buried. So if you feel like a stranger in crowded places, if you sense an emptiness behind the laughter, if you sometimes stare into the mirror and wonder who's staring back, it's not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. You're waking up from the performance. And the next step isn't to play better. It's to walk off the stage entirely. To sit in the quiet. To listen to the voice that's been there all along, beneath the mirror neurons, beneath the mimicry, beneath the noise. Your real voice. The one that was never meant to perform. But to speak. To feel. To be. Unfiltered. Unscripted. Unapologetically real. From agora to algorithm, the collapse of real connection. There was a time when speaking meant listening. Picture the ancient Greek agora. A stone plaza beneath the sun. Traders and philosophers, citizens and students, all gathering, not just to exchange goods, but to exchange ideas. Arguments happened face to face. Opinions were felt, not filtered. There were no microphones, no broadcasts, just presence. If you spoke, you had to stand behind your words. You could see the ripple of your voice in another person's eyes. Even further back, around tribal fire circles, conversation was sacred. The fire wasn't just warmth. It was focus. A gathering point for story, memory, and spirit. People didn't interrupt to react. They listened to understand. Elders spoke wisdom. Children listened with wide eyes. Connection wasn't about speed. It was about depth. But we've moved far from the fire. Today, we don't gather to connect. We gather to perform. The digital town square is louder. Faster. Borderless. But it's also emptier. We scroll through timelines filled with statements, slogans, reactions. Not conversations, but broadcasts. Not voices, but algorithms mimicking voices. We don't speak with each other. We speak at each other. And often, past each other. What we call connection has become a transaction, a status update, a brand extension. Dialogue has collapsed into a cycle of content and commentary, produced not to be understood, but to be liked, shared, consumed. The agora has become a marketplace of egos. The fire circle has been replaced by ring lights and hashtags. And the crowd? The crowd no longer listens. It reacts. It rates. It judges. Then it moves on. We're talking more than ever, but hearing less. Because real conversation requires risk. It requires being seen, not just noticed. Being challenged, not just affirmed. Being present, not just visible. And that's rare now. Because the algorithm doesn't reward presence. It rewards provocation. It rewards controversy, speed, spectacle. Say something calm, measured, thoughtful, and you'll be buried. Say something outrageous, polarizing, shocking, and you're pushed to the top. This is no accident. The platforms that promised us connection were never designed to nourish us. They were designed to addict us. To stimulate. To hijack attention. The more intense the emotion, the longer you stay. The longer you stay, the more data you give. The more data you give, the more predictable you become. And predictable people are profitable people. So connection was rebranded. Not as communion, but as consumption. Your relationships are now measured in clicks. Your thoughts are filtered through trends. Your voice is flattened into text boxes and emojis. You're told to engage, but only in ways that are fast, clean, non-threatening. You speak your mind, but only within the boundaries of the brand. You share your truth, but only if it's aesthetically pleasing. You try to be honest, but honesty without a hook goes unseen. And somewhere in this endless stream of statements and symbols, something ancient begins to decay. That quiet space between words. That look that lingers before a response. That breath before disagreement. That sacred, invisible thread that once connected speaker to listener. Now, it's all noise. The digital town square has turned into a shouting match in an empty theater. Everyone's speaking louder. No one's listening. Everyone's watching. No one's present. We've built a global stage, but forgotten how to have a conversation. And the result? Loneliness that doesn't come from silence, but from dissonance. From trying to connect in spaces that were never built for it. From mistaking followers for friends. From mistaking performance for presence. We've confused recognition with understanding. Being seen is not the same as being known. Being liked is not the same as being loved. And being surrounded is not the same as being connected. So what does this mean for us? It means the tools that promised to bring us closer have, in many ways, pushed us apart. Not because connection is impossible, but because it's been repackaged. Monetized. Stripped of depth. We were told that more access meant more intimacy. But more isn't always better. In fact, more can be the enemy of meaning. The more people we can reach, the less we're willing to risk vulnerability. The more audiences we gather, the more we censor ourselves to protect our image. The more connected we become, the lonelier we feel. Because connection without honesty is noise. And honesty without presence is lost. This is not a call to abandon technology. It's a call to reclaim intention. To remember that beneath the algorithms and analytics, we are still human. And humans weren't built to go viral. We were built to belong. To sit in stillness with another. To feel the weight of words unspoken. To know that we are not alone, not because a notification tells us so, but because someone actually hears us. The agora isn't gone. It's just waiting. The fire still burns. Beneath the screen. Beneath the noise. Beneath the hollow likes and dopamine loops. And if you close your eyes, you can still hear it. The sound of one voice reaching another. Not to perform. Not to persuade. But simply to say, I see you. I'm here. I'm listening. The introverts lie, and the extroverts collapse. They tell you it's just because you're an introvert. That's why you need to recharge after a conversation. That's why crowds feel like pressure cookers. That's why small talk feels like drowning in shallow water. Introverts just don't like people, they say. They're socially awkward. They prefer solitude. But what if that's not the whole truth? What if the very concept of introversion, as it's been marketed, is a convenient label that hides something deeper? What if your exhaustion isn't a personality trait, but a warning sign? What if it's not you who's broken, but the social world around you? We've been taught to see the world through the binary lens of introvert and extrovert. One seeks solitude. The other seeks stimulation. One reads books. The other makes speeches. One hides at parties. The other owns the room. It's simple. It's tidy. And it's wrong. Because the truth is, we are all sensitive, just in different ways. Spiritual sensitivity. Intellectual sensitivity. Emotional sensitivity. And this world? It attacks all three. Start with the spiritual. To be spiritually sensitive means to crave depth, presence, meaning. Not surface-level connection, but the kind of energy exchange that leaves you feeling expanded, not depleted. Now think about most social interactions today. Fragmented, distracted, performative. You show up, but no one's really there. Everyone's half present, their minds elsewhere. The energy is scattered. And the spiritually sensitive among us? They feel it like static in the bones. They walk away not just drained, but haunted. Haunted by the feeling that something essential was missing. Now look at intellectual sensitivity. This doesn't mean being smart. It means having a mind that seeks clarity, structure, honesty. A mind that gets overwhelmed not by volume, but by incoherence. In modern social spaces, people interrupt each other mid-sentence. Thoughts jump from meme to headline to gossip to outrage. There's no through line. No stillness. No logic. Just noise. For an intellectually sensitive person, this isn't stimulation, it's assault. It's being trapped in a whirlwind of contradictions and superficialities. A storm of thought with no anchor. And then there's emotional sensitivity. This one's easiest to recognize. Some people feel everything. The energy in the room. The shift in a friend's tone. The glance that lasted a second too long. They absorb emotion like a sponge, even when no one speaks a word. Now imagine exposing that sponge to dozens of unspoken tensions, hundreds of conflicting moods, endless streams of unresolved drama. That's what we call a normal day. So no, your exhaustion isn't just because you're an introvert. It's because your system is telling you the truth, this isn't natural. You're not just tired of people. You're tired of inauthenticity. Of pretending. Of managing personalities like fragile objects. Of filtering your thoughts to protect other people's egos. Of navigating unspoken expectations and smiling through subtle power plays. You're tired of becoming someone else, just to make others comfortable. And here's the twist, even the extroverts are burning out. The life of the party? They're drowning in expectations. They're not just showing up, they're performing. Keeping energy high. Carrying conversations. Filling silences. They become addicted to the feedback loop, but secretly terrified of the crash when it ends. And when they get home, they're just as hollow. Just as confused. Just as alone. Because the collapse isn't about personality type. It's about overstimulation. The nervous system doesn't care whether you're extroverted or introverted. It cares about rhythm. It cares about balance. And most importantly, it cares about authenticity. And modern social life is anything but authentic. We are bombarded by personas. Online. Offline. everywhere in between. People show up with curated identities, corporate masks, trend-based personalities. Even vulnerability has become a performance, shared not for healing, but for applause. You sit across from someone. They're smiling, engaged, laughing, but something feels off. It's the eyes. The way they dart away when silence falls. The tension in their jaw. The fact that you're both talking, but neither of you is saying anything real. You walk away, emotionally confused. You replay the interaction in your head. You think, they seemed nice, so why do I feel so tired? It's because your system registered the dissonance. The lack of congruence between energy and expression. The performance. The emptiness behind the polish. Social overstimulation syndrome. Not a clinical term, but a real one. It's what happens when you spend too much time around people who aren't really there. When your mirror neurons are firing constantly, trying to decode mismatched signals. When your body is reading truth, but your mind is being told to ignore it. The result? Fatigue. Anxiety. Numbness. The sense that you're losing something, but you can't name what. What you're losing is your signal. That quiet, inner resonance that tells you who you are. What you believe. How you feel. It gets drowned in the noise of other people's projections. Their demands. Their chaos. And so, like many others, you retreat. You cancel plans. You ghost conversations. You sit in silence and wonder if you're broken. But you're not. You're healing. Because withdrawal is not weakness. Sometimes, it's wisdom. Sometimes, your system knows before your mind does, this is too much. And that realization? That moment when you finally name what's happening? It's the beginning of sovereignty. You start choosing who you let in. Not based on status, or charisma, or guilt, but based on resonance. You find people who speak slow enough to hear. Who leave space in the conversation. Who aren't performing. You realize that it's not the presence of people that matters, but the quality of their presence. And slowly, something returns. Your energy. Your clarity. Your sense of self. Not because you've become less introverted, but because you've stopped apologizing for needing something real. In a world addicted to speed, your need for slowness is sacred. In a culture obsessed with performance, your craving for authenticity is radical. In a system built on stimulation, your hunger for peace is revolutionary. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by a room full of people, don't label it as introversion. Call it what it is, the body remembering what the soul always knew. You were never meant to lose yourself just to feel included. You were meant to feel whole, even in silence. Especially in silence. Manufactured extroversion, how systems reward the mask. We live in a world that applauds noise. It rewards those who speak fast, smile wide, raise their hands first. From a young age, we're taught to equate confidence with volume, charisma with extroversion, leadership with dominance. And if you're quiet, thoughtful, reserved, you're labeled as shy, antisocial, difficult. Not because you are, but because the system was never built for you. Zoom in on the architecture of modern life, schools, workplaces, social media, entertainment. These aren't neutral spaces. They're carefully designed arenas that reward the loud and filter out the still. In school, participation points are awarded not for insight, but for frequency. Speak often, raise your hand, dominate the discussion. It doesn't matter if your words carry weight. What matters is that you're speaking. Sit silently. You're marked down. Invisible. Forgotten. But ask yourself, why? Why is quiet presence treated as a flaw? Why is reflection seen as resistance? Because stillness can't be measured. And what can't be measured, can't be managed. Manufactured extroversion isn't just a cultural preference. It's a control strategy. The systems that govern us, education, corporations, politics, require energy to flow in one direction, out. Outward energy is easy to monitor. Loudness is predictable. Performance is controllable. But solitude? Silence? Internal awareness? That's dangerous. Because the solitary thinker doesn't need the crowd. And the moment you stop needing the crowd, you stop being controlled by it. Think of the workplace. Meetings. Brainstorming sessions. Open office plans. The emphasis is on visibility, on collaboration, alignment, team spirit. You're expected to speak, to contribute, to network, to be a team player. But rarely are you asked to sit, to reflect, to go deep. Even creativity has been co-opted. No longer an internal flame, it's become a group exercise. Post-it notes on whiteboards. Buzzwords and icebreakers. And beneath it all, a silent message: your value lies in your extroversion. And what happens if you resist? You're seen as uncooperative. Difficult. Cold. Not a culture fit. The systems aren't subtle. They push you toward the mask. Because the mask is easier to handle than the real you. And here's where it gets darker. The crowd, the collective energy of groupthink, isn't just overwhelming. It's weaponized. Group compliance keeps systems alive. And the easiest way to ensure compliance? Make the crowd louder than the dissenter. History has shown this again and again. In Plato's allegory of the cave, prisoners are chained facing a wall. Shadows play on that wall, projected by puppeteers behind them. To the prisoners, those shadows are reality. Now imagine one prisoner breaks free. He sees the truth, the fire, the objects, the real world beyond the cave. He returns to tell the others. But they mock him. They reject him. Because his truth threatens the collective illusion. Plato wasn't just describing philosophy. He was describing every system that fears the solitary thinker. Fast forward to Orwell's 1984. Telescreens watch every move. Loudspeakers broadcast truth as dictated by the state. Privacy is eradicated. Thought itself becomes a crime. Why? Because silence breeds independent thought. And independent thought breeds rebellion. Even today, in the age of digital democracy, dissent is filtered through algorithms. Say something unpopular, your reach drops. Go silent too long, you're forgotten. Speak with nuance, you're misunderstood. So we adapt. We polish our words. We echo the crowd. We choose applause over authenticity. Not because we don't know the truth, but because we've learned what the system rewards. And slowly, we forget the cost. Manufactured extroversion becomes internalized. We start performing even in solitude. Smiling at the mirror. Thinking in hashtags. Measuring our worth in metrics. The mask hardens. Until one day, we realize we can't take it off. We're exhausted. Disoriented. Haunted by the feeling that we've betrayed something sacred. Our own stillness. If you've ever sat in a meeting and felt your soul shrink. If you've ever walked through a loud crowd and felt suffocated. If you've ever smiled through a conversation and wondered who was doing the smiling. You're not broken. You're responding to an environment that punishes depth. And this environment isn't accidental. The louder the group, the quieter the dissent. Because systems don't need thinkers. They need repeaters. They don't need reflection. They need reaction. They don't want authenticity. They want alignment. But beneath the noise, beneath the performance, there is another path. A different kind of power. Not loud. Not flashy. Not charismatic. But rooted. The power of solitude. Of clarity. of self-containment. The person who no longer needs to perform can no longer be manipulated. The person who can sit in silence without fear can no longer be coerced by noise. The person who honors stillness is not weak, they're ungovernable. So if you've been made to feel lesser for your quiet, if you've been pressured to fake extroversion, if you've been punished for choosing depth over display, remember this: the system fears your silence more than your words. Because silence can't be monetized. It can't be manipulated. It can't be turned into spectacle. It just is. And in a world that runs on noise, the still mind becomes the ultimate rebellion. Let them keep their applause. You've remembered the sound of your own breath. You've reclaimed the rhythm of your own truth. You've walked away from the stage and back into yourself. The unspoken war, energetic vampirism and emotional parasites. You've felt it. You walk into a room and your chest tightens, though no one said a word. You finish a conversation and feel strangely heavy, as if something was taken from you. You spend time in certain environments, offices, classrooms, gatherings, and by the end, you're hollow. Exhausted. Depleted. Not because of what was said, but because of what was silently exchanged. There's a war no one talks about. Not of bullets or words, but of energy. Not in the new age, crystal-waving, wishful thinking way you might expect. But in the deeply human, biochemical, psychological, and yes, spiritual sense. At any given moment, you are in an energetic exchange with your environment. People are not just physical beings. They are emotional ecosystems. Carriers of invisible frequencies, moods, intentions, wounds. And some of them feed off you. These are the energetic vampires. They don't bite your neck. They bite your boundaries. They don't ask for your blood. They take your attention. They don't drink from goblets. They siphon your peace, slowly, constantly, until you forget you ever had any. They come in many forms. The friend who always turns the conversation back to themselves. The coworker who offloads their stress onto you daily. The family member who demands your validation but never offers theirs. The stranger who dominates the room with chaos, forcing you to manage the emotional temperature. They don't always know what they're doing. Most don't. But the effect is the same. You give. They take. You shrink. They expand. And when it's over, they feel better, while you walk away feeling like a house left with all the lights on, the windows open, and the electricity drained. This isn't just metaphor. The nervous system responds to emotional labor the same way it responds to physical labor. Your cortisol rises. Your heart rate elevates. Your blood sugar drops. Your brain's mirror neurons fire relentlessly, trying to decode the other person's tone, expression, need. And over time, your baseline energy begins to erode. You wake up tired. You begin to dread interactions, even with people you care about. You feel guilt for wanting solitude. You question whether you're just too sensitive. But maybe you're just tuned in. Highly sensitive people, empaths, introspective souls, they aren't weak. They are not fragile. They're receptive. They pick up signals most have learned to ignore. Their radar isn't broken, it's working overtime in a world that overloads it. Imagine trying to pour water from a cup while someone's drilling a hole in the bottom. That's what social life can feel like for the energetically aware. You smile, you listen, you comfort. But there's a leak. And no matter how much you refill, you're always left empty. This isn't about cutting everyone off or living in a cave. It's about learning to recognize the silent economy of energy. Because energy is currency. And just like money, it can be spent, stolen, wasted, or invested. The problem is, most of us were never taught to budget our emotional energy. We were taught to give it freely. To equate kindness with self-sacrifice. To confuse obligation with compassion. So we become easy targets. People intuitively sense when someone listens deeply. They feel drawn to it. But not everyone comes to listen in return. Some come only to unload. To extract. To be heard, not to hear. And over time, if you're not careful, you begin to mistake this extraction for connection. You confuse being needed with being loved. You mistake being depended on for being valued. You equate exhaustion with meaning. But true connection nourishes both sides. It doesn't drain. It circulates. It breathes. So how do you tell the difference? Ask yourself this after spending time with someone. Do you feel more you or less? If you walk away clearer, calmer, expanded, there was a healthy exchange. If you walk away buzzing, heavy, confused, or numb, your boundaries were breached. We are taught to ignore these signals, to rationalize them. They're going through a lot. I don't want to seem selfish. This is just how it is. But that voice inside you, the one that winces when your phone rings, that tenses before certain conversations, that sighs when someone enters the room, it isn't paranoid. It's perceptive. Because here's the truth, most people aren't aware of the energy they carry. And even fewer are aware of what they do with it. Some carry wounds they've never acknowledged, and they cast those wounds onto everyone around them. Some are so disconnected from themselves that they feed off others without realizing it, using chaos, manipulation, or emotional neediness as hooks. They don't do it maliciously. But that doesn't make it harmless. And when you're tuned in, when you can feel those currents, you begin to see it everywhere. That's when the real challenge begins. Because once you start protecting your energy, people notice. You become distant. Selfish. Not like you used to be. But what they're really saying is, you stopped letting me feed off you. Let them say it. Because your job is not to be a battery for the emotionally unavailable. Your job is not to be the therapist, the dump site, the background character in someone else's storm. Your job is to be whole. To be sovereign. To be rooted in your own field of energy, and to protect it like sacred ground. This isn't new wisdom. Every spiritual tradition, every ancient teaching, speaks of energy, of presence, of boundaries. From the mystics who withdrew to the desert, to the monks who trained in silence, to the healers who fasted before ceremonies, those who carried light always understood, you must guard the flame, or the world will consume it. You were never meant to be available to everyone. You were never meant to carry the weight of every wounded soul. You were never meant to bleed emotionally to prove your goodness. Your empathy is not a resource to be mined. It's a compass. A signal. And when it says no more, you listen. Because the unspoken war is not just out there. It's in every moment you ignore your own depletion for the sake of someone else's comfort. It's in every smile that masks your fatigue. It's in every I'm fine when your soul is whispering I need space. But it's also in your awakening. The moment you realize you're not broken. You're just no longer willing to be drained. You've remembered a frequency most have forgotten. And once you tune into it, you never go back. The loneliness of awareness and the cost of seeing clearly. At first, it feels like clarity. You begin to notice things others don't. The way people repeat phrases they've absorbed from the media. The way conversations loop in cycles without substance. The way the news presents outrage as information. The way society tells you to be yourself, then sells you a script. You see it. All of it. And for a brief moment, it feels like freedom. But then in comes the silence. You try to share what you see. But people look at you like you've said something wrong. Something dangerous. You speak gently, cautiously, hoping to wake someone up, but they smile politely, or change the subject, or turn on the TV. And that's when the realization hits. The more awake you become, the lonelier you feel. Because the world doesn't welcome those who see clearly. It rewards those who conform comfortably. Loneliness is no longer just emotional. It's existential. You walk through a crowd and see masks, some literal, some psychological. You hear voices, but no truth. You feel surrounded, but untouched. You don't belong in the games being played, but you're still on the board. This is the cost of consciousness. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But he also warned, when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. Waking up is not euphoric. It's disorienting. You lose your footing. You question everything, your relationships, your beliefs, your identity. What once felt familiar now feels hollow. What once brought comfort now brings unease. You're no longer asleep, but you're not yet free. You're between worlds. And in that space, loneliness grows. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole. Not by merging with the collective, but by standing apart from it. By descending into the depths of your own psyche. By facing the parts of yourself that society tells you to suppress. Jung knew that such a journey couldn't be done in groups. Loneliness, he wrote, does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. You feel that. You try to talk about meaning, and others laugh it off. You mention your unease with the world, and they tell you to stay positive. You point out the manipulation in media, in politics, in language, and they say, it's not that deep. But it is that deep. You're not imagining it. You're not broken. You're evolving. What you're feeling isn't depression. It's separation. The natural separation that happens when you start leaving behind the borrowed beliefs and synthetic values that once tethered you to the herd. You begin to crave solitude, not because you hate people, but because you finally love the truth. And the truth is rarely found in the crowd. Kierkegaard, the father of existentialism, once said, "The crowd is untruth." He believed that truth could only be grasped through inwardness, through a personal, solitary relationship with existence. And so you withdraw. Not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. You stop chasing validation. You stop participating in conversations that go nowhere. You stop performing. And in the silence that follows, you hear something rare, your own voice. Unfiltered. Untethered. Unapologetically real. That voice may tremble at first. It's been buried for years under layers of conditioning. But with time, it steadies. It sharpens. It begins to speak truths that no crowd could ever echo. You learn to sit with your pain, not distract from it. You learn to question your thoughts, not obey them. You learn to find beauty in emptiness, not fear it. This is not easy. The path of awareness is strewn with losses, loss of illusion, loss of approval, loss of belonging. But what you gain is sovereignty. You no longer need permission to exist. You no longer need to be understood to speak. You no longer need the crowd to feel real. Because you've remembered what they forgot. That truth is not a group project. And freedom is not found in consensus. If you feel disconnected, it may not be because you're failing. It may be because you're awakening. And while the early stages of that awakening are marked by isolation, what follows is something extraordinary. You begin to attract others, not many, but a few. Others who have walked the same path. Others who have stared into the same abyss. Others who don't flinch when you speak the truth. These are not just friends. They are mirrors. Not mirrors that reflect who the world wants you to be, but mirrors that reflect who you are when no one's watching. Until then, let the silence be your teacher. Let solitude be your sanctuary. Let loneliness refine you, not define you. Because the further you go in this journey, the more you realize you were never truly alone. You were just the first to see. Building a sanctuary, the path of selective connection. Not all loneliness is a curse. Sometimes, it's the soil from which a new kind of life begins. Because the goal was never to escape people. It was to find the ones who don't require you to abandon yourself to be loved. After waking up, after peeling back the illusions, after realizing how hollow most interactions have become, it's easy to retreat entirely. To disappear. To convince yourself that solitude is safer, that silence is enough. And for a while, it is. You need that silence. That clearing. That inner house cleaning of all the false selves you once wore to fit in. But eventually, you feel it again. The ache. The yearning. Not for crowds. Not for approval. But for resonance. For a connection that doesn't drain, but restores. That's the moment the path shifts. From withdrawal to intentional connection. You begin building a sanctuary. Not a fortress to keep everyone out, but a sacred space that only a few can enter. This begins with boundaries. Not as walls, but as filters. Boundaries are the sieve through which real connection is sifted. They say, I will give, but not at the cost of my peace. I will listen, but not absorb. I will share, but only when the ground is fertile. Setting boundaries is not about fear. It's about honor. You begin to honor your time. Your attention. Your energy. You start saying no, not with anger, but with clarity. You recognize that every yes to someone unaligned is a no to someone who might have been. And then, you turn inward. You create rituals that restore you. Morning stillness. Evening walks. Journaling. Music. Prayer. Creative expression. Not as productivity hacks, but as communion. These aren't hobbies. They're sacred appointments with yourself. In a world that profits from your distraction, attention becomes a spiritual act. And in that clarity, something strange begins to happen. You notice certain people differently. Not the loudest ones. Not the ones constantly visible. But the quiet ones. The ones who pause before they speak. The ones who listen between the lines. The ones who don't perform. These are your kindred. Not always similar in background, or taste, or story, but in frequency. You don't have to explain yourself to them. They meet you in your silence. They don't demand to be entertained. They don't flinch when the conversation goes deep. They feel like exhaling. You weren't made to belong everywhere. You were made to find them. This is the power of chosen family. Not the one assigned by blood, but the one built by resonance. People who respect your boundaries without testing them. Who remind you of truth when you forget it. Who hold space for your doubt without trying to fix it. Who you can be ugly with and still feel whole. It may only be one or two. Sometimes less. But it's real. And once you've tasted that kind of connection, you stop craving the counterfeit. You stop over-explaining. You stop overextending. You stop chasing. You let go of trying to be understood by those who only listen with their ego. Instead, you protect your inner circle like sacred ground. Not everyone gets access to your sanctuary. Because not everyone knows how to honor it. And that's not cruelty. That's wisdom. There is no virtue in being endlessly available. There is no grace in letting yourself be depleted to keep others comfortable. Your peace is not selfish. It's necessary. And when you begin to live this way, rooted, boundaried, attuned, you send a signal. To the world. To others. To yourself. That your energy is sacred. That your silence is golden. That your presence is not a commodity. And slowly, your life begins to change. You find yourself drawn to different spaces. You spend less time in noise, more in nature. You stop chasing conversations that go nowhere. You begin speaking only when you mean it. You realize that real connection is rare, but it's enough. You don't need hundreds of voices validating you. You need one conversation where you feel seen. You don't need to be invited everywhere. You need one space where you can take off the mask. You don't need to perform. You just need to be met. And when that happens, when you're met, not for what you do or say, or offer, but for who you are, something softens. The armor drops. The breath deepens. The loneliness begins to dissolve. Because you've remembered what connection really means. Not constant interaction. Not endless exposure. But shared presence. Two souls who sit together in truth and ask for nothing more than what already is. This is the sanctuary you're building. It won't look like what the world tells you it should. It may not be loud, or flashy, or large, but it will be real. And in a world full of simulations, that's not just enough, it's everything. The echo in the silence. The room is still crowded. The voices still rise and fall. The smiles still flash like camera shutters. The scripts are still being performed, jokes rehearsed, gestures repeated, masks firmly in place. But something's different now. You walk through it differently. You don't flinch at the noise. You don't reach for validation like a lifeline. You don't shrink to fit, or puff up to impress. You move like someone who remembers. The loneliness hasn't vanished, but it no longer terrifies you. Because now, you understand it wasn't there to punish you. It was there to point the way. Every moment you felt like a stranger in the crowd. Every time you walked away from a conversation and felt emptier than before. Every time you smiled and something inside you whispered, "This isn't real," it wasn't failure. It was awakening. Your loneliness is not a defect. Not a disease. Not a reason to fix yourself. It's a message. A sacred whisper. A call to remember. Remember that you were not built for noise. You were built for signal. You were not designed to be everywhere. You were meant to be fully here. That feeling of not belonging? It was your soul's immune system, rejecting the unnatural, the inauthentic, the dissonant. That ache you carried in the pit of your stomach, in the quiet moments after the crowd dissolved? That wasn't emptiness. That was clarity, waiting to be heard. Because silence doesn't mean absence. Silence means space. And in that space, you finally heard your own voice. Unfiltered. Unafraid. Unmistakably yours. This doesn't mean you'll never feel alone again. It means you'll never confuse that feeling for failure again. Now you know how to listen. Now you know how to choose. Now you know how to stay close to what resonates and walk away from what doesn't. You've stopped mimicking. Stopped reacting. Stopped contorting yourself to fit rooms not built for your truth. And in doing so, you've become sovereign. There's a strength in you now. Quiet, but immovable. Not loud, but unmistakable. Because you've learned that presence isn't about being noticed. It's about being rooted. Being real. Being enough without needing to be explained. You don't need to speak constantly to be heard. You don't need to perform to be accepted. You don't need the crowd to feel alive. You were never meant to be part of the noise. You were born to hear what only silence reveals. The echo you once feared? It's no longer empty. It's full of everything you are now. Awake. Whole. And finally, home.